I believe we've hit a critical mass now, so I'm going to start. So hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this installment of the quarterly IIRG in Conversation webinar series, this time focusing on child suspect interviewing. My name is Susanne Flølo, and I am the chair and co-director of IIRG, together with my dear colleague, Professor Chris Kelly. And for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, the International Investigative Interviewing Research Group, or IIRG, is the global network of researchers, practitioners, and policymakers that are dedicated to advancing ethical, evidence-based investigative interviewing practices. And through our work, we aim to bridge research and practice and to support the continued development of fair, effective, and humane approaches to interviewing. And we are especially pleased that today's conversation is held in cooperation with the ImpleMéndez cost action, reflecting our shared commitment to promoting the implementation of the Mendes principles across different contexts. Before we begin, just a couple of quick updates from the IIRG community. So this webinar is intended as a preview of our upcoming masterclass or training school, if you will, in Leuven, Belgium, which is organized together with ImpleMéndez, and in the lead up to the 2026 IIRG conference. And we are very pleased to say that the masterclass is now fully booked, which clearly shows just how much interest there is in this topic of child suspect interviewing. And if you're planning to join us at the annual IIRG conference taking place from the 8th to the 10th of July in Leuven, Belgium, please note that tomorrow is the final day to register at the early bird rate. So do make sure to secure a place before then if you haven't already. So we've already received an unprecedented number of registrations for the conference. So we also encourage you to arrange your travel and accommodation as soon as possible. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce you to our moderator for today, and that is Professor Miet Vanderhallen. And Miet is Professor of Legal Psychology at the University of Antwerp, and is also affiliated with Maastricht University, and she is a longstanding member of both IIRG and ImpleMéndez, and a leading scholar in investigative interviewing with extensive experience in both research and practice. We are delighted to have you with us to guide today's conversation. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Miet.
Thank you, Suzanne. I don't know whether the others also have it, but I have a huge echo.
Yeah, I think you might be logged on to two computers, perhaps?
No, I checked that, and that was not the case. So I will check it again.
We might have to rely on your help or advice here, Brian. Do we have headphones? Our web administrator, Brian, asked. It's typical because everything was working just a second ago, but now, maybe. There's no echo, but I also cannot hear you yet, Miet?
Yes, for me there is a lot of echo, but I will try to do it like this.
But we can barely hear you, actually. So there's something, it sounds like the microphone is a bit far away.
And is it better now?
Not really.
Then maybe I will try it like this again.
Yeah.
Yes?
Now we're back with the echo. I'll try to mute.
Well, the echo is really horrible. So I will maybe try to get out and get back in again.
Okay, we can try that. Okay, so just some, for the ones who just joined, we have some technical issues, but we will be back in just a few minutes.
I'll just check now. Do you hear me? And there's no echo.
Yes.
Okay, so we're not all gonna have to go through this. Yeah,
yeah, but that's not bad anyway. I mean, 1 out of 7 computers. That's a calculated risk, but we'll allow Miet to come back and join us in a few minutes. And in the meanwhile, you can check out the IIRG website for the upcoming conference. If you haven't already, I mentioned in my introduction that the masterclass, unfortunately or fortunately, is already sold out. But there's still room at the conference, which is looking to be our biggest conference yet. And we do encourage you to make use of the current early bird discount, which is available until tomorrow. So if you do consider coming to Leuven from 8 to 10th of July to participate in the conference, I would sign up now. And now back to, we'll try Miet again.
Yes, now it's perfect. So
excellent. Okay.
ready and set to go. So thank you very much for waiting for me. So it's a pleasure for me to host this IIRG webinar in collaboration with the ImpleMéndez cost action. And the webinar actually consists of 3 parts. So the first part will be an introduction to the topic by Dr. Julia Korkman. And then we will have a panel discussion. We have 3 excellent panelists. So I'm very happy to introduce them later as well. And of course, afterwards, I'm happy to give the floor to all of you to ask some questions and to dive deeper in this very interesting topic of child suspect interviewing. But let me first introduce you to Dr. Julia Korkman. She will explain the importance of today's topic and touch upon some of the crucial elements when we talk about child suspect interviewing. So Dr. Julia Korkman is a professor of practice at, and I don't know how to pronounce it, Julia Abo Academy.
But that's good enough.
Okay, thank you. An adjunct professor legal psychology at Helsinki University, which is much easier to pronounce, and the senior program officer at the European Institute for Crime Prevention and Control, affiliated with the United Nations. She's also the president of the European Association of Psychology and Law, and her research focuses on investigative interviewing, victims' rights, but also in particular child interviewing. And she was the first author of the white paper on child interviewing, forensic child interviewing of the European Association on Psychology and Law, which came with the first recommendations and the latest recommendations, I should say. And currently, she's also working on child suspect interviewing. And that's the reason why we are really happy that you were willing to accept our invitation and to introduce the topic and the context of child suspects. So please, Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Miet. And I'm so happy for this collaboration. And thank you to IIRG also and the ImpleMéndez network, of course. I am just going to share my screen and let's see now. You should hopefully see my presentation now. Great. So already for many years, I've been training police officers mostly in Finland. And it occurred to me earlier this year that actually only this year that while we have a very good writing in the pre-investigative act for police officers in Finland that they have to be specialized if they conduct child interviews. It's always been sort of interpreted as if this was true only for children who are witnesses or victims. And the police officers interviewing child suspects or interrogating, as is still said here, they are not expected or sort of required to have this training. But in fact, when we checked with a police expert, I know we went back to the Investigative Act and looked at it. It really doesn't say anything about the legal position of the child. So this should be the case for all children. But in my country, really, all the police officers interviewing child victims or witnesses are generally trained with a quite long 1-year specialization training. They know everything about hypothesis testing, and they know it at least. We still have to conduct more research, but it seems that the quality is better. We have some research to suggest that. So it seems really good for child victims generally. but not at all the case for child suspects. And this is, of course, then a problem really that I think is common. But my impression is that in all countries the situation is the same, that the effort has been placed largely on child victims. And this is, of course, a problem, particularly in a way an ironic problem, since we know from criminological research that many of the children who commit crimes are actually also crime victims themselves. So this separation is somewhat silly. In the Mendes principles, juveniles are explicitly noted as a vulnerable group, or a group that can be in a vulnerable position in the criminal justice system. And it's stated, among other things, that analysis of false confessions have repeatedly demonstrated that juveniles and interviews with psychosocial or intellectual disabilities are prevalent among false confessors. So this is one of the things we already know quite well, and I think these Mendes principles, all the core principles, if they were upheld, they would help all the groups that we are interviewing, including then juveniles and adolescents. We know also from research that there's this very well-established age crime curve, implying that the age when a certain group of people are most likely to commit crimes is when they are young. It begins in the late teens and goes on until the early 20s, and typically young people grow out of it, so to say. And I know from police officers who are experts in investigating crimes committed by children that many of them are quite aware that if you have a youth, a child, an adolescent who has committed one crime, usually it takes a discussion and then that's no longer necessarily a problem. That it's a very small group among these offending youth who actually go on to commit serious crimes and repeated crimes. And this has to do with the developmental issues connected to adolescence. Those of you who have children in your vicinity might know that children develop quite steadily and nicely until they're around 12, and then it may become something more interesting as a pattern. So the same child who can be like really wise and adult thinking and calm one moment of the day, and another moment they can be quite all around. And it has very much, of course, to do with hormonal changes. And we know that these hormones that are very active in puberty are drivers for high intensity, thrilling experiences. We know that youth take much more risks in group, for example, than they do alone, but they are more risk prone. All in all, there's more reward sensitivity, they have more impulsivity compared to other ages. Also, the sort of focus in development goes from the family, the immediate family, and maybe school teachers, to the group, the peer group, so other youth. And then they are very vulnerable to like ending up by accident in a group that is taking far too many risks. So it's not only about the individual features of a certain youth or family background, although they, of course, also influence, but it's also about, in a way, the social context in which they will find themselves. And if they find themselves in an antisocial peer context, this kind of driver may lead to involvement in quite serious activities, including criminal activities. And we know that the prefrontal cortex is still very much under development, and that's the place where decisions are made and where assessments of future harm, for example, is being done. So this is important for sort of monitoring your behavior with a more long-term future in sight. And another really important developmental thing that we know is that whereas the kind of what is known as cold cognition, so kind of logical intelligence, develops in a way rather steadily. In adolescence in particular, the hot cognition that is related to strong emotions is much more uneven. Of course, this is true for adults as well. Human beings are not good at making decisions when they are very angry or very much in love or something else very emotional. But in youth, this is particularly strong. And this is again the crime age curve that I was mentioning earlier on. It's been known for a very long time that risk-taking characterizes in a way, normal adolescent development. And there are even researchers today who are a bit worried that youth they may take too few risks, that the large majority of youth are actually not at all behaving very bad. And in fact, they might take less risks than some previous generations. That is true in for example, the Nordics, according to many researchers. But then we have, of course, another issue, which is the recruitment of minors into organized crime. So we have very much discussion throughout Europe about crime as a service, where youth, particularly youth in vulnerable positions, are being recruited into crime. And especially in Sweden, but also in other countries, there's been a very grave concern about children committing really serious crimes. And of course, policymakers want to intervene, and one of the interventions then that is being raised in many countries and currently very much in Sweden is to lower the age of criminal responsibility. And in Sweden, which has been at the forefront of children's rights for a long time, they are indeed lowering the age from 15 to 13. So this is something that is quite concerning from a scientific perspective, because there is in fact even now quite well conducted scientific evidence that lowering the age of criminal responsibility is not the way to go. In Denmark, they actually did this in a kind of attempt. They were worried about youth criminality, and they lowered the age of criminal responsibility from 15 to 14 for a period of 20 months. And then they raised it again, because indeed it did not lower the rate of crime among children. It actually even increased it among those who were already offending before. So I think this is evidence that when a 14-year-old commits a crime, it doesn't really have an effect if you say that if you do this, you might end up in jail in 2 years. It's like, that's not how it works. They have to have more immediate reactions, more immediate consequences. And then we also know from other research that prisons are not a very good place for people to grow up or to improve their behavior. So this is probably not the most efficient way to go. I also mentioned in the beginning that we know from research that many of the children committing crimes, and I'm deliberately saying children, we're talking about under 18-year-olds, but of course the group is adolescents, it's from teens until young adults. So but anyway, children who commit crimes are much more likely also to have been victims of crimes than those who do not commit crimes. This comes as no surprise, I think, to the audience here today, but there is quite strong research on this, including some quite recent Finnish research by Nora Elonen and Taina Laajasalo, which shows that, among other things, that adverse childhood experiences increase the risk both of offender-only, victim-only, and victim-offender statuses. So this also, I think, means that for the police officers and other practitioners who encounter children who have committed crimes, this is very important information. It also means that the possibility to manipulate these children into committing crimes the possibility is higher. There is a report from a few years ago from FRA, the Fundamental Rights Agency, on how children are treated when they are suspects or accused in criminal proceedings, and the findings are quite disturbing. In nine European countries, there were significant problems, and they were certainly not child rights based. And there's very little research on how child suspects are being interviewed, but the little there is seems to indicate that they are not interviewed at all in best practice ways. This is not surprising, because even children who are victims are not always interviewed in best practice ways. But for example, research in Sweden shows that the situation seems quite bad. And I think many of us have also concrete practical experiences of this. So I was training in the biggest police department in Finland a couple of years ago, and child interviewing. Most of the police officers were in groups where they interviewed child victims, and they were quite aware of hypothesis testing, as I said, and the importance of asking open-ended questions and encountering children nicely. They actually did quite good work from the beginning. And then there was a group of those who interviewed child suspects. That was a different group, and it felt like going 30 years back in time. It was really very much less according to any best practice. it did improve, I have to say. They have had very nice attitude. Oh, sorry. Very nice attitudes. And I think I just clicked so if when you get this as a PDF, you will be able to reach the literature I'm referring to by clicking, but I shouldn't be doing it now. Miet mentioned the white paper by the APL, and indeed what we attempted to do, or what we did with a big group of researchers throughout Europe and also beyond, was to kind of condense 10 key recommendations for interviewing children. And also there we note that really the bulk of the research has been on child victims and on younger children, but there's very much less on adolescents in general and much less on child suspects. We do believe that the core principles remain the same, and what we will discuss today in the panel, I am sure, is that not maybe immediately and not without really making some kind of a change or tweaks to them. In the child forensic interview recommendations, you have things like interviews need to be well trained and they need to understand how memory works. They need to understand that they should be non-confrontative and ask open-ended questions. All of this, of course, goes for child suspects as well. But then how you, for example, create rapport, how you express the rights and rights and responsibilities to the child in the interview, that's a different thing. Just a few developmental considerations. Child suspects as interviewees have, of course, compared to adults, less developed memory and linguistic skills, increased suggestibility. There's a proneness to act on impulse. And one, I think, particular vulnerability is that teenagers tend to look adult. So you have tall boys with a beard, and they don't seem childish at all on the outside, but they can be very childish on the inside. And maybe a special group that I want to highlight are children who have been forced to kind of manage on their own. For instance, like children who have gotten asylum, who have come on their own. They have normally quite different developmental patterns than other children. They may be really good at surviving on their own, but they may then have in other ways be developmentally very, very childish. Okay, so in general, I would say that vulnerability due to development seems to be very well recognized when we talk about protection, but not so when we discuss criminal responsibility, and this is indeed a big problem. Lindsay Malloy is familiar to those of you who have been looking at research on child interviewing. I'm sure she has a very nice, it's already a bit old, but I don't think it's aged, a very nice TED talk on why teens confess to crimes they didn't commit. So that's something I would recommend to see. And then just before I sum up, some thoughts about the aim of the investigative interview with a child suspect. Again, like in the Mendes principles for investigative interviews in general with suspects, it's not to extract a confession. In the case of children, it should not be to punish the child. It's not predominantly to make children understand the consequences of their acts. That is important to come at some point, but perhaps not in the first investigative interview. But it is to collect information in a way that is respectful and ensures that all the rights of the child are addressed, and ensuring that children understand the decisions they take, because they might really have to take some difficult decisions on what to tell in an interview or how to behave. And these are difficult things. As Miet said, I'm with her and many other colleagues currently working to try to come up with recommendations that would be helpful when interviewing child suspects, and this is what we'll be working on in the workshop later in the summer, and I think in the years to come. So we're just getting started, and it's really not an easy task, especially I think with all the rights and responsibilities. But I'm very happy to have colleagues throughout Europe to look at this with. Just a small just to note, HEUNI, where I work, the European Institute for Crime Prevention and Control, we have a few recent publications of interest in this regard, for instance, about youth criminal exploitation and trafficking. So you can check these out on the webpage of HEUNI if this is of interest. So now I hand it over back to Miet for the panel.
Yes, thank you so much, Julia. I think you made it very clear that we really need to put way more attention to children when they are being suspected of a crime and afterwards interviewed by the police because of many challenges we go through. And it was really nice that you gave an overview also from Scandinavia, because we also always look at the Scandinavian countries as a good example. And it's good to know that also you are still having many challenges to deal in a good way with child suspects. And for the panel, which is our second part of the webinar, we invited 3 experts from their own perspective to answer some of the questions that we came up with when we talk about interviewing child suspects, like what are the challenges you come across and what are the needs? So what do you still need to improve the quality of child suspect interviewing? And it's my honor to introduce them to you first. So our first panelist is Dr. Vicky Kemp from Nottingham University. And she is a leading empirical researcher in youth justice. And among the scarce research that there is on child suspect interviewing, you did quite some of them. So it's really an honor to have you here today. And you're currently also working on the Nuffield study on the detention and questioning of child suspects. And what I really like about that project is that you are trying to put forward the child first approach instead of the suspect perspective in first instance. And Vicky will enlighten us about the topic from a more academic perspective and her experience as a researcher on child suspect interviewing. Our second panelist is Christel Janssens, who is a criminologist and a lawyer. And what is really interesting to me and appealing, I think, is that after working for 15 years at the Belgian police, where she was involved in child interviewing, mostly victims and witnesses, she made a switch in her career and she became a criminal defense lawyer. And as a youth lawyer, she is currently assisting child suspects at police stations. And besides that, she is also delivering a training to youth lawyers in Belgium on how to assist child suspects in police interviews. So this is a totally different perspective from the defense side, while assisting children during the police interviews. And then our third panelist is actually making the circle, because that's Michelle Nelen, who is also from Belgium. And she is a specialized chief inspector at a local police station. And she has a particular expertise in interviewing child victims and witnesses. She's not only doing interviews in practice, but she's also one of the trainers of the child interviewing protocol for victims and witnesses that is being used in Belgium. And she's also the regional coordinator of this network for interviewers who interview child victims and witnesses. However, and this is really interesting, especially in the case of Belgium, since 2018, she's actually primarily responsible for interviewing child suspects at her police station. And that is something that is quite rare, because we often don't have these specialized units for child suspects in our police stations. So it's obvious, very clear why we invited those 3 members to be part of our panel and to discuss different topics. However, I only mentioned some small introductions about you. So my first questions for our participants to get a better understanding of how you come across child suspects in your profession. Can you explain a bit more in detail how your work is related to child suspects and to interviewing child suspects? And maybe first I give the floor to Vicky, and then maybe to Christel, and then to Michelle.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Vicky.
And thanks for inviting me here today. My career began many years ago when I was actually providing police station legal advice. I'd go into custody and talk to children. And after that, I became a researcher. And so I really wanted to return to that topic. So now I go into, I'm looking at police custody. I am actually engaging with children in police custody. It's not an ideal place to talk to them, so I don't go into detail, but it's a case of finding out what's actually going on And from their voices and from what they have to tell us, what we're finding out is that those legal safeguards that are supposed to apply aren't happening at all. So we'll minimise what we have to say. I'll say to them, are you all right? What's happening? Have you seen anybody? I'll talk to them after the interview. It's just, did you make comment or not? So not in detail, but talking to children themselves has really helped to have a focus on what's actually happening in practice.
Thank you very much. And it's really interesting that you indeed have the perspectives of the child themselves, of the children themselves, because that's often lacking in research at the moment. And then now I give the floor to Crystal to give a better understanding of what you're doing as a youth lawyer.
Yes, good afternoon. As a lawyer, I practice in the fields of criminal and juvenile law. As a juvenile law lawyer, I represent many juvenile suspects during their police interview. And after the police interview, I defend the juvenile in juvenile court. I also teach lawyers who want to become a juvenile lawyer. If you want to become a juvenile lawyer, you must complete an additional training. This training is not full-time, but it is spread out over a year. In addition to the theory, they must complete practical training, including 1 full day of assisting with the police interview of juvenile suspects. During this training, we also use role-playing exercises. Someone from the group takes on the role of a juvenile attorney. One person plays the juvenile suspect and somebody else is the police officer. And the juvenile suspect is questioned about specific charges against him or her, for example, selling drugs in a Brussels park. And together with the group, a confidential consultation takes place, as well as the assistance during the police interview. And after the role play, feedback is given, and the juvenile lawyers learn a lot from this.
Very interesting to hear about how the training is being approached and what is the content of this special training for youth lawyers. And then let's go to the police, who is on the other side often, or considered to be on the other side of the interview. So Michelle, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. As you already said, I work at the local police station where the youth criminal unit is made in 2018. We handle cases involving minors who have committed serious offenses, such as rape, theft, violent crimes. And my work consists on conducting interviews, assessing the context around the offenses, and dealing with young people within a legal and in some sort pedagogical framework. It's not only the interview itself, it's the whole context within the offense that is needed to be seen.
Okay, thank you very much. So now that we know you a little bit better, we are also going to explore more your experience with child suspect interviews. And so the first question that we came up with is, we learned from Julia's introduction that there is a lot going on. So there's a lot of overlap between victims and child victims and child suspects. They have the same vulnerability, but then when you look at practice, well, it's not really the same way how they are looked at. So what are, in your perspective, the biggest challenges when it comes to interviewing child suspects? And maybe we do the same order again, and I start again with you, Vicky.
Thank you very much. I think from my perspective, the biggest hurdle is the lack of training. Certainly in England and Wales, the same interview model applies as to whether you're interviewing adults or children. The police officers don't require specific training, special training. The lawyers don't require special training. And I think that an added problem to that is the low fee for the legal aid for lawyers. It is a low fee, so it encourages perhaps the minimum amount of effort. And I think that's led to the majority of our interviews now being no comment. That's what the children are being advised. So 4 out of 5 cases we've found are no comment, so very high. And while that's really important advice when there's little or no evidence and to protect your client and particularly a child, it also means that opportunities to divert children from court are not being found, and they're going unnecessarily to court and then coming out afterwards and being diverted when the court says, why wasn't this diverted? So I think it's the lack of training, and it's also the issue of the legal aid fee. The solicitors need to be remunerated properly for an important role that they play in the police interview.
Thank you very much. Interesting to hear that it is also like an organizational structure and actually a financial argument that plays a role, because we're always looking at more knowledge and hands-on tools and techniques, but there's also the whole culture behind it that is apparently very, very important. Crystal, I give the floor to you to look at the lawyer's perspective in this regard.
Yes, thank you, Miet. The biggest challenges, there are, of course, quite a few challenges. Most lawyers would say, I think, working with the police, but I see it differently. For me, the biggest challenge is the lawyer, him or herself. Firstly, as juvenile lawyer, we have an incredibly important role to fulfill during the police interview of a child suspect. First, we have a confidential consultation followed by the police interview. If the minor has been arrested, this consultation may last at a maximum of 30 minutes. And during these 30 minutes, juvenile lawyers have a lot to do. Gaining trust, putting the minor at ease, listening, determining the strategy, explaining his rights, and so on. Yet, in practice, it appears that with most of the juvenile lawyers, the police interview begins already after just a 15 minutes consultation. So the remaining 15 minutes go unused. Secondly, I think we can all agree, and we've already said it, minors are vulnerable. Minors can be easily influenced. Many lawyers pay too little attention to this. Many lawyers point a finger at the police and believe the police is being too leading in their questioning. The lawyers must first look at him or herself. A lawyer is not trained at all in asking open-ended questions. How does the communication between the lawyer and the minor take place during the confidential consultation? The police is not allowed to be leading, but how leading has the lawyer been, him or herself, during the confidential consultation? And this is a topic we don't pay enough attention to. Thirdly, the lawyer must also ensure that the minor is prepared for the questions the police will ask. One sensitive topic, for example, is snitching. Most minors do not want to snitch, and the police will always ask questions about the other suspects. The minor has the right not to answer these questions. An important question for the juvenile lawyer: how do I prepare the minor for this during the confidential consultation? This is also covered during the training. And fourthly and finally, I would also to address the issue of the police repeating certain questions during a police interview. Particularly when dealing with minors, I believe that repetition of questions by the police is dangerous. Minors are impulsive and susceptible to pressure. And in the worst case scenario, this could lead to a false confession. And we must prepare the minor for this potential danger as well. This is also part of the training for juvenile lawyers. So in a nutshell, juvenile lawyers should spend more time in confidential consultations with their clients. A good start is half the battle.
think that's a real expression from a lawyer who wants to defend his client to the best ability. I have a question related to Vicky mentioning that they come across many no-comment interviews in England and Wales, so that the child suspect is often being advised to use the right to silence throughout the whole interview. Is that something that you also come across in Belgium?
No, it's no, that's not the case, because it's not so easy when you want to advise your client that he or she have the right to remain silent. It's not the case that, okay, the minor can say, okay, I will do that, but during the interrogation or during the child interview, yeah, minors are very impulsive, and when they say, okay, why to remain silent, but then the police repeat the question, and the minor or my client, oh yeah, I'm going to say it. For example, the snitching, my client will not say the name of the other suspects, but the police is repeating, and then, oh, the police said, oh, we know the name of the other suspects, it is Billy, and then my client says, oh yeah, okay, it's Billy, and yeah, and then he's snitching, and yeah, that's very dangerous, I believe.
Okay, I hear a lot of reflections on how the police deals with child suspects. So I'm very curious, Michelle, because you're, of course, the one who needs to find out what happened. And I heard you say that it is not very common to have like a child suspect unit in Belgium. So what are, according to you, for the police officer, the challenges when interviewing child suspects?
Well, first, I think it's important to know that we have good intentions. It's not really the case that we want to make the child feel uncomfortable or anything else. Instead, I think it's very important for us to build rapport, to build a relationship with the child that we are interviewing. And then there are a few things that make it a lot more difficult. I know it's not easy for a child to come to our police station and to have the interview with a youth lawyer that they've probably never seen before. We ask their parents to not be in the interviewing room. So they have to come to us without their parents, but with the lawyer. And then we have to make some time to build rapport, but that's not always that easy, often because there is not a lot of time to do it. On the other hand, we are not trained, not really trained for the suspects, the child suspects, and everybody is doing whatever they can with good intentions, but not with a protocol like there is for the victims. Then on the other hand, we see that a lot of children that are coming to us with serious crimes are children that are coming for more than one time. So it's very important to build rapport and to have some kind of relationship with them. I think there is a challenge also that we all do our separate things. So the police is doing their thing, the lawyer has another view, the parents have another view. Maybe there are social services involved in the family. The parents have some kind of voice, but we only hear the child speaking at that point. So I think it's important that we improve a connection between all parties. So that we can do something for the child bigger than the interview. I think the training is really necessary because we need some more light in special needs, in training, as in open questions and all of that. We also see that over the last few years, child suspects are being younger and younger. Right now, we see a lot of 12, 13, 14-year-olds, where it was at first 17, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. So I think that's a different approach. There are a lot of challenges.
Yes, I hear you say indeed there are many challenges, not only within the police themselves, so that they don't have the right tools to conduct like a proper interview, but also that there are some developments within the children that are being interviewed as a suspect. So more serious crimes, they become younger. And that also refers back to what Julia was saying, like what do we do with the age of criminal liability? Because that's a huge difference between countries. For example, in Belgium, it's 12, but in England and Wales, it's 10. While in many Scandinavian countries, it's 14 and 15 and 16 years old. So we definitely can learn, I think, from each other where and what we have to look at and how we should approach all those young people. And you mentioned training as that there's a big need for training, and that really smoothly runs into my next question, actually. Like, of course, you have those challenges when dealing with children, but when we discuss those challenges, what are, according to you, the needs to overcome those barriers? So what do we need? For example, Vicky, what do you need to improve the quality of research, for example, and get a better understanding in how child suspect interviews are being conducted and how they, for example, are perceived by the juveniles themselves?
I think that's really important. I think what comes down to training for me is for the police officers, for the lawyers to have a much better understanding of child development, things about how to communicate effectively with children, about adverse childhood experiences and trauma, which may impact on the child, neurodisability and disproportionality. And I think that from that training, there'll be an increased awareness of where you perhaps need somebody else to come in to help the child give their best evidence, like a speech and language therapist or an intermediary. And I think from an initiative that we've piloted with specialist training, I think actually joint training can work really well. And I think to bring lawyers and police officers together, and sometimes to get the role play where the lawyer takes on the solicitor's role and the solicitor takes on the police officer's role, is really quite effective in identifying each other's perspective and would help going forward to seeing what that's all about. It's about the best evidence. And it isn't about trying to get a conviction out of a child.
Thank you very much, Vicky. And I when you talk about joint training, if I'm not mistaken, there is like a little piece of joint training in the juvenile lawyers training, isn't there, Crystal? When you do the role plays, do you also involve real police officers?
Normally, real police officers, but I was also a police officer, so I took the role on me. Yes, okay. Now, what is needed to improve quality? What should a lawyer's role be? Everyone has to play their part, including the lawyer. And the lawyer's role is an active one and begins right from the start of the police interview. I experienced this just last week. My minor client, 15 years old, arrested, and we entered the interrogation room. And where is my chair? In the corner of the interrogation room. Why? Apparently, the police don't want me sitting next to my client. So what do? I take the chair and place it next to my client because that's where I belong, next to my client. Now, what is needed to improve quality? Training also. Training. It's positive that future juvenile lawyers receive training in assisting with the police interview of child suspects. However, there is no continuing education. Many lawyers approach me and remain uncertain during the police interview. In court, while waiting, you can listen to the arguments of the other lawyers. You can learn from this. But during the confidential consultation and the police interview, you are on your own as a lawyer. And as a lawyer, you cannot see the other lawyers at work. and feedback is so necessary. So an intervision and supervision session for juvenile lawyers would only benefit the quality of the consultation and the legal assistance.
So again, I hear training, but actually training as such is not sufficient. You also need like continuous coaching or follow-up to learn from each other. Is that what you're? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you. Michelle, what is your viewpoint on this? I heard already training as well, but what kind of training would you need as a police officer?
I think there are a few things. I think it's necessary that we have some interviewing protocol kind of training, preferably that it's repeated as you already said. But maybe also what we need to do with children with special needs, with lower intelligence, with psychiatric disorders. They're all extra challenges when we're interviewing them. And in practice, we see a lot of them. So I think that is also very necessary that we know more about developmental psychology and mental disorders, so that we can take that into our interview to make it better. I think there's also necessary that a lot of police stations make a unit for youth criminality, so that there is some kind of specialism within the police force, because now everybody is doing it on his own, trying to make the best out of it. As I said earlier, I think the cooperation between the parents, the police, social services, the prosecutor, and all the system there needs to be improved, so that we can do something for the child more than just the interview, and make it better afterwards.
We're there more or less on the same page, because I also heard Vicky mentioning like we need some help from social workers or speech and language therapists or intermediaries for child suspects too, because we cannot become an expert in everything, and so we might also support each other and help out each other. I also got a very interesting question in the chat on training, because we are all agreeing we need training. And then the question is, what would the training preferably look like? Because with new technologies, at the moment, there's also quite some research on trained police officers, not only with role plays like we do in real life, but by using avatars, which also enables police, for example, to train, well, I would not say in the evening hours, but while we have some time, and not only when there is this specific days of training. So when you have some free time, or you want to prepare for an interview, when you want to have some extra training, you can just use a tool with an avatar to well, to train yourself as a police officer, but maybe also as a youth lawyer. And I'm now maybe looking at Vicky and Julia, whether you have experience with this, or you know a bit more about what the added value might be of these kind of trainings.
I think there's an issue where that sort of training can help a lawyer or help a police officer look to sort of what the issues are going forwards. But I think that for me, that it's more about what does that broader training program look like? Where are we at the moment? What needs to change? And certainly in England and Wales, the child's perspective hasn't been there for many, many years. So I think first of all, what we need is to have a look, as you're doing and as ImpleMéndez is doing, is what does that interview framework actually look like from the child's perspective? And then I think from that, perhaps there can be toolkits and way in which people can have apps and avatars and things to help them on the job, and to have a quick check, well, what is the out of court framework here? What is this? What is that? But for me, that foundation has to be there in a good national training module.
I'll add to that. I think certainly, for instance, avatar training can be an excellent way to train these more technical things. So if there's an understanding that you need to phrase questions in an open-ended way, you become much better at doing that. And then you can focus more on the contact and on the issues that were brought up in the discussion, that many of the children have been taught just to say no comments, or they are struggling with the situation. So I think they can be a really, really nice contribution, and they can also be used to uphold the level of interviewing skills. And we've done one training in Finland with asylum interviewers, so that's a different context, but very, very, very similar skills that are needed. Where Jenny Skrivars from Åbo Academy, she did we produced a training for asylum seekers, which was a half-year long, and we started with an insight training session. Then they had modules that they could do in their own time, including some interview training issues, then small group conversations twice, and then an ending seminar. So I think this kind of getting the motivation and really discussing why this is important is certainly important. But I think will be really, I mean, these are developing rapidly now, these different forms in which AI or like large language models and avatars can help us both in practice when conducting investigations and also in training. So I think there's much to do about that. But if I may add, I was just listening with envy to the situation to the obligatory training of lawyers, or to what Crystal was mentioning, this training for lawyers working with youth. I was just recently at a seminar regarding the Méndez principles, where this was one of the points that we have talked a lot about training police officers, prosecutors, even judges, but very little about lawyers, and they are really crucial here and in general in investigative interviewing. But I would say here in particular with young suspects. So that was really interesting, and I think this is something to try to keep as a model and develop.
Thank you. What I learned from this is that we first need a good foundation, and from there we can start building training programs with using new technologies, AI, and so on. I'm also looking at the other questions in the Q&A. So there's one question that there might be competing goals or desired outcomes in an interview room with a child suspect. So police is seeking information. Lawyers, of course, are seeking to preserve self-incrimination of the child. Parents are often, on the other hand, encouraging the child to tell the truth. And then who should be the most important, or is actually often forgotten about, and that is, of course, the child. So does the panel think we need a multi-agency youth justice approach to child interviewing with the suspects? And I think we already touched upon it, that we need more people involved in the interview and help with the interview. But then the question is, where do we put all those people? Do we put them all in the interview room, or do they help us with preparing the interview? What would you recommend in this regard? Because me, myself, I'm like, okay, what if we put 5 adults in the interview room? Would that help the child?
I think there is an important question about who is in that interview room. And so I think the question is who needs to be there? And that needs to be on a case-by-case basis. And I think it depends on the needs of the child to an extent. So in England and Wales, we have to have an appropriate adult, and we think it should be mandatory to have the lawyer. But in a way, to my mind, it's that appropriate adult. You need someone to look after the child's welfare, but then you might need somebody to look at the communication needs. So if an intermediary is needed, then I think there's a bit about training those people who need to be there to provide that sort of function without having too many people around the table. So an intermediary can't take on the role of the appropriate adult, and neither can the appropriate adult take on the role of the intermediary. But you don't want too many people around that table. So I think informing the training, informing how things are done, and then to my mind, it needs to rest on an assessment of the child and the needs of their child in giving that best evidence as to who needs to be there.
Can I add to this?
Yes, I think we have, well, it's 5, but we start a little late, so I think we have 1 or 2 minutes left.
Okay, just I think in many countries there are specialized units. There's the Barnahus system, or in Finland, there's specialized units, etc. Where currently I think many places are looking at including child suspects in kind of this system, so that when they have clear special needs, they would have really expert interviews, or they would have the same kind of assessment made. And I think that would be really the way to go. And also I think I've seen a lot of really excellent police interviewers once they have enough training, etc. And then I think there doesn't need maybe to be an intermediary if they actually really know how to do those interviews in many cases, not in all necessarily.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, Vicky, of course, because we are running over time, so no worries. Thank you very much for being here and give your input from your perspective. It was so valuable.
Thank you very much for asking me. Bye-bye. Sorry to have to dash. Bye.
Bye. There was another question. I saw a hand raised by Jenny.
I think she must be enabled somehow to take the floor.
She put it in the chat.
Yeah, if you can write it in the...
It's there.
Yeah.
She's asking, what are your opinions on arrangements regarding interpretation for parents if they don't understand the spoken language?
Very good question. So is there any practice on the use of interpreters for parents?
Maybe I can say something.
Yeah, of course.
In practice, we also ask an interpreter for the children, but if necessary, there is one for the parents too, just not in the interview room. So then it is maybe some family members, or if it's not possible, then we ask someone to come. Because I think it's very important to have a conversation with the parents after the interview. But that is in practice something quite individually of the police officer. If there is time enough to have the chat with the parents, and how long the chat is, and if there is in fact someone needed to talk it through if they're speaking another language.
Yes, thank you very much. Regarding time, I think I will do like a very short wrap up because we touched upon really important topics, and it was actually the idea that we would have this webinar as like a preparation for the masterclass of the IIIRG-conference in July. However, it's sold out. So that's good news. But I also have some other good news, like the conference itself is not sold out, so you can still register. And probably in 2027, we will, again, with the cost action ImpleMéndez, and maybe again in collaboration with the IIRG, and also another cost action, Why Just Lang, deliver again this masterclass. Speakers in the masterclass are, among others, Julia Korkman, Francesco Pompeda, and then from a more linguistic perspective, Jeanette Schaefer and Maria Arce from the Why Just Lang cost action. Well, I was also involved, and I also got some really interesting input, like the interpretation, where to go with training, using AI, large language models, and so on. So also a big thank you to all the participants and who attended this webinar. Special thanks to Julia and the panelists. And I want to mention one last thing, because I know that Michelle and Crystal, you are both practitioners, and it's not very common for you to speak in English and absolutely not to attend and participate in a panel in an international webinar while you are not a native speaker. So thank you very much for putting in all the effort and being so courageous to give us your perspective. That was really, really nice. Thank you very much. And then I give back the floor to you, Suzanne.
Yes. Also, thank yous coming from me. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and a particular thank you to you, Miet, for moderating, and our excellent speakers for sharing your insights and expertise on such an incredibly important and complex topic. We hope that you've all found the discussion both informative and inspiring. And if today's conversation sparked your interest, we very much look forward to continuing it with many of you in Leuven at the masterclass. But as Miet said, that is if you were lucky enough to secure a spot before we hit max capacity. And not least, we hope to welcome you at the IIIRG-conference this summer from the 8th to the 10th of July in Leuven, Belgium. Until then, thank you again for your time and engagement, and we hope to see you again soon at future IIRG and ImpleMéndez events. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day.